The shadows on the cellar wall had become Eleanor Blackwood's only companions in the 3 weeks since her brother and stepfather had locked her away. Their wrath over her refusal to marry the aging banker Jeremiah Holt knowing no bounds. Eleanor traced her fingers along the cold stone of her prison, wondering if she would ever feel the warmth of the sun on her skin again. The year was 1875, and in the harsh territory of Wyoming, a woman's defiance was not merely frowned upon, it was crushed with an iron fist. Rebecca Byrne flinched as the metal cuffs bit into her wrists, the cold iron a constant reminder of her family's betrayal. 21 days had passed since her stepbrother Marcus and her uncle had dragged her down the wooden stairs and secured her to the wall of their root cellar, promising she would remain there until she agreed to marry the wealthy cattle baron who'd offered to clear their mounting debts in exchange for her hand. The dim light filtering through the small ground-level window was her only indication of day and night. Rebecca had counted every sunrise, watching the golden light creep across the dirt floor before disappearing, leaving her in darkness once more. She pulled at her chains for what felt like the 1,000th time, knowing it was futile but unable to surrender to her fate. The Byrne homestead sat isolated on the edge of Sweetwater County, far enough from town that her screams went unheard. Her family had spread the word that she'd gone to visit distant relatives in Denver, a convenient lie to explain her sudden absence. Rebecca knew that eventually they would force her to accept the marriage, or perhaps they'd simply tell everyone she had died of fever during her travels. Either way, her life as she knew it was over. She heard the familiar creak of the floorboards above. Someone was home. Her throat, parched from lack of water, couldn't manage more than a hoarse whisper as she called out. They fed her just enough to keep her alive, barely speaking to her during their brief visits, treating her as if her disobedience had rendered her less than human. But the footsteps overhead were different today, heavier, more purposeful than the careful steps of her kin. Rebecca held her breath, listening as unfamiliar boots crossed the kitchen floor above. A stranger? Hope fluttered in her chest like a wounded bird, afraid to take flight. "Hello," she called, her voice breaking. "Please, help me." The footsteps paused, then moved quickly toward the cellar door. Rebecca pulled herself up as straight as her chains would allow, her heart pounding wildly against her ribs. The lock rattled, and then sunlight flooded the stairwell as the door swung open. A tall silhouette filled the doorframe, backlit by the afternoon sun. Rebecca squinted, unable to make out the features of the man who stood at the top of the stairs. For a terrible moment, she feared it might be Harold Whitcomb, the 50-year-old cattle baron her family was so desperate to make her husband. "Is someone down there?" The voice was deep but youthful, tinged with concern. "Yes," Rebecca gasped. "Please help me." The man descended the stairs quickly, his spurs jingling with each step. As he reached the bottom, the weak light from the window illuminated his face. He couldn't have been more than 25, with dark hair falling across his forehead beneath a dust-covered Stetson. His blue eyes widened in shock as he took in the sight of her chained to the wall, her once fine dress filthy and torn, her auburn hair matted around her pale face. "Good God," he breathed, rushing forward. "What happened to you?" Rebecca stared up at him, suddenly afraid to speak the truth. What if he knew her family? What if he believed their lies? "My name is Isaac Devereux," he said, kneeling beside her. "I'm passing through on my way to Green River. My horse needed water, and this place looked abandoned." His eyes moved to the chains on her wrists, and his expression hardened. "Who did this to you?" "My uncle and stepbrother," Rebecca whispered, the words burning her throat. "They want me to marry a man I despise." When I refused, she lifted her shackled hands. Isaac's jaw tightened. "How long have you been down here?" 3 weeks, I think. I've tried to keep count." Without another word, Isaac stood and examined the chains. They were secured to iron rings embedded in the stone wall, the locks old but sturdy. "I'll need to find something to break these," he said, his voice grim. "Do you know where they keep tools?" Rebecca nodded. "There's a shed behind the house. But please hurry, they'll be back soon. They go into town on Wednesdays, but they never stay long." Isaac squeezed her shoulder gently. "I'll be right back. Don't worry." She almost laughed at that, as if she could do anything but worry. But something in his steady gaze calmed the panic that had been her constant companion for weeks. Rebecca watched him take the stairs 2 at a time, then heard his boots crossing the floor above. The minutes stretched endlessly as she waited, straining to hear any sound that might indicate his return or worse, her family's early arrival. When she finally heard footsteps approaching the cellar door again, she held her breath. Isaac appeared at the top of the stairs, his arms full of tools. He descended quickly, dropping them at her feet. "I found a hammer and some chisels," he said, selecting a heavy mallet and a flat iron chisel from the pile. "This might be loud, and I can't promise it won't hurt, but I'll try to be careful." Rebecca nodded, extending her arms as far as the chains would allow. "Do it, please." Isaac positioned the chisel against the link closest to her wrist. "Hold still," he warned, then brought the mallet down with controlled force. The sound echoed through the cellar, making Rebecca flinch. Again and again, he struck, the chain gradually weakening with each blow. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he worked, his focus absolute. Finally, with a metallic snap, the first chain broke. Rebecca gasped as her arm fell free, the relief so intense that tears sprang to her eyes. Isaac moved immediately to the second chain, working even more quickly now. When it too broke apart, Rebecca sobbed openly, rubbing her raw, bleeding wrists. "Can you stand?" Isaac asked, offering his hand. She took it, her fingers trembling. "I think so." But as she tried to rise, her legs buckled beneath her, weak from weeks of disuse and poor nutrition. Without hesitation, Isaac scooped her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, he realized with anger, feeling her bones through the thin fabric of her dress. "I'm getting you out of here," he said, his voice low and fierce. "Can you tell me your name?" "Rebecca," she whispered against his shoulder. "Rebecca Byrne." Isaac carried her up the stairs and through the kitchen. The house was modest but well kept, showing no outward signs of the cruelty that festered within its walls. He pushed open the front door with his boot and stepped out into the late afternoon sunlight. Rebecca turned her face to the sky, tears streaming down her cheeks as the warmth touched her skin. It felt like a miracle, this simple sensation she had feared she might never experience again. Isaac's horse, a tall bay gelding, was tethered to the water pump near the house. He carried Rebecca to it, then paused. "Do you have anywhere to go?" he asked. "Anyone who might help you?" Rebecca thought of the town of Bitter Creek, just 15 miles away. She had friends there. The schoolteacher, Mrs. Holloway, had always been kind to her. But would anyone believe her story? Would they take her word against that of her uncle, who was known as a respected rancher? "I don't know," she admitted. "My family has influence in these parts. They'll say I'm lying, or that I've gone mad." Isaac's expression darkened. "Then we'll go somewhere they can't reach you. I have a friend in Green River who owns a hotel. You'll be safe there until we figure out what to do next." Rebecca looked up at him, noting the determination in his blue eyes. "I'm not leaving you to face this alone," he said simply. "No decent man would." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching hooves made them both freeze. Around the bend in the road, two riders appeared, their familiar silhouettes sending ice through Rebecca's veins. "It's them," she gasped, clutching Isaac's shirt. "My uncle and Marcus." Isaac moved quickly, lifting her onto his horse before mounting behind her. "Hold on," he murmured, one arm securing her against his chest as he took the reins with his free hand. The riders had spotted them now and were urging their horses forward, shouting words that were lost in the wind. Isaac dug his heels into his horse's flanks, and the animal leapt forward, powerful muscles bunching as it broke into a gallop. Rebecca pressed back against Isaac's solid form, the world blurring around them as they raced away from her prison. Behind them, she could hear the pounding of hooves as her family gave chase, but Isaac's bay was fresh and strong, quickly widening the gap between them and their pursuers. They rode hard for what felt like hours, the landscape changing from the open grassland around the Byrne homestead to the more rugged terrain leading toward the mountains. Only when they could no longer hear any sign of pursuit did Isaac slow their pace, allowing his horse to breathe. "Are you all right?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. Rebecca nodded, though in truth, she was dizzy from the exertion and the overwhelming reality of her escape. "Where are we going?" "There's an old line shack about 5 miles ahead," Isaac replied. "Used to belong to the Wallace outfit before they sold their range. We can rest there tonight. It'll be safer than trying to reach Green River before dark." The sun was setting by the time they reached the abandoned shack, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Isaac helped Rebecca down from the horse, his hands gentle on her waist. Her legs nearly gave out again, and he steadied her with a strong arm around her shoulders. The shack was small but sturdy, with a stone fireplace and a narrow cot against one wall. Dust covered every surface, but it was dry and, most importantly, safe. "Wait here," Isaac said, helping her to sit on the cot. "I'll take care of the horse and gather some firewood." Rebecca watched through the single window as he unsaddled his bay and led it to a small lean-to attached to the shack. Her mind was spinning, struggling to process the dramatic change in her circumstances. Just hours ago, she had been a prisoner with no hope of escape. Now she was free, albeit on the run, in the company of a stranger who had risked his own safety to rescue her. Isaac returned shortly with an armful of wood and kindling. He knelt by the fireplace, arranging the wood skillfully before striking a match from a tin he carried in his vest pocket. The flames caught quickly, casting a warm glow throughout the small space. "I have some jerky and hardtack in my saddlebags," he said, dusting off his hands. "Not much of a meal, but it'll keep us going until morning." Rebecca nodded gratefully. "I haven't had proper food in weeks. They gave me just enough to keep me alive." Isaac's expression darkened as he fetched his saddlebags. "Your family," he said, the word laced with contempt. "Why would they do this to their own blood?" Rebecca accepted the strip of jerky he offered, taking a small bite before answering. Her stomach was so unused to food that she feared eating too quickly would make her ill. "My father died 2 years ago," she explained. "He left the ranch to me and my uncle jointly, with the understanding that my uncle would manage it until I married. But the drought last year hit us hard, and we lost nearly half our cattle to disease the winter before that." She took another careful bite, savoring the salty flavor. "Harold Whitcomb offered to buy the ranch for 3 times what it's worth and clear all our debts, but only if I came as part of the bargain." "And you refused?" Rebecca's eyes flashed with a spark of the spirit that had gotten her locked away. "He's old enough to be my father, with a reputation for cruelty toward his first 2 wives. I told my uncle I'd rather die than marry him." Her voice softened. "I didn't think they'd take me so literally." Isaac sat beside her on the cot, his thigh warm against hers. "Your uncle was willing to force you to marry a man you despise for money?" "The ranch has been in our family for 3 generations," Rebecca said. "To my uncle, that legacy means more than anything, even my happiness." "That's no excuse," Isaac replied, his voice hard. "No piece of land is worth sacrificing a person's freedom." They ate in silence for a while, the fire crackling in the hearth. Rebecca felt strength slowly returning to her limbs as the food worked its way into her system. When she had eaten all she dared, she looked up to find Isaac watching her, concern evident in his gaze. "What about you?" she asked. "What brings you to these parts?" Isaac leaned back against the rough wooden wall. "I've been working cattle drives between Texas and Wyoming for the past 5 years. This season, I decided to try my hand at something different. I've got a friend in Green River who offered me work at his freight company." "Do you have family?" A shadow crossed his face. "Not anymore. My parents had a small spread outside of San Antonio. Fever took them both when I was 19. I've been on my own since then." Rebecca heard the grief in his voice, still raw despite the passing years. "I'm sorry," he shrugged, though the casual gesture didn't match the pain in his eyes. "It was a long time ago." Rebecca studied him in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the way his dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the capable hands that had broken her chains. She had known him for only hours, yet she trusted him completely, a feeling as unfamiliar as it was profound. "Thank you," she said softly, "for saving me. If you hadn't stopped at our house today." "Don't think about that," Isaac interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "You're safe now. That's what matters." Rebecca nodded, though the weight of her ordeal still pressed heavily upon her. She raised a hand to push her tangled hair from her face, wincing as her fingers caught in the matted strands. Isaac noticed her discomfort. "There's a creek about 50 yards behind the shack," he said. "The water's clean. In the morning, you can wash up before we head out." "I'd like that," Rebecca replied, suddenly acutely aware of her filthy state. She had always taken pride in her appearance, and the weeks of captivity had left her feeling less than human. "You should rest," Isaac said, standing. "Take the cot. I'll keep watch." Rebecca wanted to protest, to insist that he needed sleep as much as she did, but exhaustion was rapidly overtaking her. The adrenaline that had sustained her through their escape was fading, leaving her body heavy with fatigue. "What if they find us?" she asked, unable to keep the fear from her voice. Isaac checked the revolver at his hip, his expression resolute. "They won't. But if they do, I'll handle it." Something in his tone told Rebecca that he was more than capable of keeping that promise. She stretched out on the narrow cot, her body practically crying with relief at the simple comfort. As her eyes drifted closed, she saw Isaac settle by the window, his profile outlined by moonlight, standing guard between her and the dangers of the night. Morning came with the gentle touch of sunlight through the shack's single window. Rebecca opened her eyes, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. For a heartbeat, panic seized her. Had her escape been nothing but a dream? But as her vision cleared, she saw Isaac asleep in a sitting position against the wall, his hat pulled low over his eyes, and relief flooded through her. She sat up slowly, her body stiff and aching from weeks of confinement followed by the hard ride. Her movement, slight as it was, roused Isaac immediately. He pushed his hat back, alert despite his awkward sleeping position. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep. Rebecca considered the question. "Better," she decided. "Still weak, but better." Isaac nodded, rising to his feet with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to physical labor. "The creek I mentioned last night is just through those trees," he said, gesturing toward the back of the shack. "I'll see to the horse and get some breakfast ready while you wash up." Rebecca was touched by his consideration. He understood her need for dignity, without her having to explain it. She stood carefully, her legs steadier than they had been the previous day. "I don't have any clean clothes," she realized, looking down at her filthy dress. Isaac rummaged in his saddlebags and produced a clean flannel shirt. "It'll be too big, but it's better than nothing. Once we get to Green River, we can get you whatever you need." Rebecca accepted the shirt gratefully and made her way outside. The morning air was crisp and clean, the sky a brilliant blue above the pine trees surrounding the shack. She followed the sound of running water to the creek, a clear stream that tumbled over smooth stones. Glancing back to ensure her privacy, Rebecca slipped out of her tattered dress and into the cold water. She gasped at the temperature but forced herself to stay, scrubbing weeks of grime from her skin with handfuls of sand from the creek bed. She unwound her matted hair and ducked her head under the surface, working out the tangles as best she could with her fingers. By the time she emerged, she felt reborn. She pulled on Isaac's shirt, which hung to her knees, and used a strip torn from her ruined dress to belt it at the waist. Another strip served to tie back her damp hair. The result was far from fashionable, but it was clean, and that was all that mattered to Rebecca. She returned to the shack to find Isaac had built a small fire outside and was brewing coffee in a battered tin pot. He looked up as she approached, and something in his expression made her cheeks warm. "Better?" he asked, his eyes taking in her transformed appearance. Rebecca nodded, suddenly shy under his gaze. "Much." He handed her a tin cup of coffee and a portion of the remaining hardtack. "It's not much of a breakfast, but we'll get a proper meal in Green River." They ate in companionable silence, the forest around them coming alive with morning birdsong. Rebecca found herself watching Isaac covertly, noting the competent way he moved, the quiet strength in his bearing. He was handsome, certainly, but it was more than that. There was a kindness in him, an inherent decency that had driven him to help a stranger in need without hesitation. "How far is Green River?" she asked as they finished their meager breakfast. "About 20 miles, Isaac replied. "We should reach it by early afternoon if we ride steady." Rebecca nodded, then hesitated. "What will happen when we get there?" Isaac's eyes met hers. "That depends on what you want, Rebecca. My friend Jackson owns the River Peak Hotel. He can give you work there if you'd like, or help you find passage east if you prefer to leave Wyoming behind." The thought of leaving brought a surprising pang of regret. Despite everything, this rugged territory was her home. Her father had loved this land, had taught her to love it too. The idea of abandoning it felt like surrendering something precious. "I don't know what I want yet," she admitted. except to be free from my uncle's plans. You have time to decide, Isaac assured her. No one will force you to do anything you don't choose. The simple promise meant more to Rebecca than he could know. Choice, the very thing her family had tried to take from her, was being offered freely by this man who owed her nothing. They packed up quickly after breakfast, leaving no trace of their presence at the shack. Isaac helped Rebecca onto his horse before mounting behind her, his arms creating a secure circle as he took the reins. "Ready?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. Rebecca nodded, leaning back slightly into the solid wall of his chest. "Ready." They rode at a steady pace through the morning, following game trails and old cattle paths rather than the main road. Isaac was taking no chances with her safety, avoiding any route her family might use to search for them. As they traveled, Rebecca found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the horse's movement and the reassuring presence of Isaac at her back. The horrors of her captivity began to recede, replaced by a cautious hope for what might lie ahead. "Tell me about your friend in Green River," she said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "Jackson Miller," Isaac replied. "We worked the same cattle outfit in Texas for a couple of years. He came north and used his savings to buy the hotel about 3 years ago. It's not fancy, but it's clean and respectable. And he'll help a stranger? Just like that." She felt Isaac's shrug. "Jackson's a good man. Besides, he owes me a favor or two." "For what?" Isaac chuckled, the sound rumbling against her back. "I pulled him out of a river once when he was too drunk to remember how to swim. And I may have saved him from marrying a woman who was already married to 3 other men across the territory." Rebecca laughed, the sound surprising her. It had been so long since she'd had reason to. "He sounds interesting." "He is that," Isaac agreed. Never a dull moment with Jackson around. They continued their journey, stopping briefly at midday to rest the horse and share the last of Isaac's provisions. The land grew more rugged as they traveled, with rocky outcroppings and steeper hills that slowed their progress. "There's Green River," Isaac said finally, pointing to a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley ahead. "We made good time." Rebecca studied the town as they approached. It was larger than Bitter Creek, with several streets of buildings, including a proper church with a white steeple and what appeared to be a newly constructed railroad depot. The sight of so many people going about their business, women shopping, men loading wagons, children playing, struck her with a wave of emotion. This normal scene had seemed so far beyond her reach just a day ago. They rode down the main street, drawing curious glances from passers-by. Rebecca was acutely aware of her unusual attire, but the townspeople seemed more interested in the fact that she was riding double with a dusty cowboy than in her clothing. Isaac guided his horse to a 3-story clapboard building with a freshly painted sign declaring it the River Peak Hotel. He dismounted first, then reached up to help Rebecca down, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "Wait here," he said, tethering his horse to the hitching post. "I'll find Jackson." Rebecca nodded, suddenly nervous. What if Isaac's friend refused to help? What if word had somehow reached Green River about her escape? She fidgeted with the makeshift belt at her waist, watching anxiously as Isaac disappeared into the hotel. A few minutes later, he emerged with another man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a neatly trimmed beard and shrewd hazel eyes. The stranger assessed Rebecca quickly, his gaze lingering on her improvised clothing before returning to her face. "Miss Byrne," he said, tipping his hat. "Jackson Miller. Isaac tells me you're in need of sanctuary." Rebecca straightened her shoulders, determined to appear stronger than she felt. "I am, Mr. Miller. But I don't expect charity. I can work for my keep." A smile crinkled the corners of Jackson's eyes. "Isaac mentioned that too. As it happens, I lost my housekeeper last week. She ran off with a railroad man." He gestured to the hotel behind him. "It's not grand, but it's respectable, and the work isn't too demanding. Room and board plus wages. What do you say?" Relief washed over Rebecca. "I say yes, Mr. Miller. And thank you." Jackson nodded, satisfied. "Good. Now, let's get you inside before any more of the town notices a young woman wearing nothing but Isaac's shirt." He shot a pointed look at his friend. "And you'd better come too. You look like you could use a bath and a hot meal yourself." Inside, the hotel was modestly furnished but clean, with a small lobby leading to a dining room. A staircase curved up to the floors above, and a reception desk stood to one side, currently unattended. Martha, Jackson called. A middle-aged woman with iron-gray hair appeared from a back room, wiping her hands on her apron. Yes, Mr. Miller? This is Miss Byrne, our new housekeeper. She'll need a room and some proper clothes. Can you help her get settled? Martha's kind eyes took in Rebecca's appearance, and something in the older woman's expression suggested she understood more than was being said. Of course. Come with me, dear. I think I have some things that might fit you until we can get you to the mercantile. Rebecca turned to Isaac before following Martha. Will you be here when I come back down? His blue eyes held hers. I'll be here, he promised. 2 hours later, Rebecca descended the stairs feeling transformed. Martha had drawn her a hot bath and provided a simple but clean dress that fit reasonably well. The older woman had also helped her comb out her hair and pin it into a neat arrangement. After weeks in the cellar, the simple acts of bathing properly and putting on clean clothes felt like unimaginable luxuries. She found Isaac and Jackson in the dining room, deep in conversation over cups of coffee. Isaac had clearly taken advantage of the hotel's facilities, as well. His dark hair was damp from washing, and he'd changed into a clean shirt. He looked up as she entered, and the appreciation in his eyes sent a flutter through her stomach. There she is, Jackson said, rising to his feet. Feeling better, Miss Byrne? Much better. Thank you, Rebecca replied, taking the seat Isaac pulled out for her. And please, call me Rebecca. Martha appeared with a plate of roast beef, potatoes, and green beans, setting it before Rebecca with a motherly smile. Eat up, dear. You need your strength. The meal was simple but delicious, and Rebecca had to remind herself to eat slowly. Her stomach had shrunk during her captivity, and she didn't want to make herself ill. I've been filling Jackson in on your situation, Isaac said as she ate. He agrees we need to be cautious. Your uncle might come looking for you here. Rebecca set down her fork, appetite suddenly diminished. Do you think they would follow us this far? If what you've told me about the ranch's financial situation is true, they have a strong incentive to find you, Isaac replied grimly. Whitcomb's offer won't stand without you. Isaac is right, Jackson added. But Green River isn't Bitter Creek. Your uncle doesn't have influence here, and I know the sheriff personally. If they come, we'll be ready. Rebecca nodded, though anxiety still churned in her stomach. What about you, Isaac? Will you continue to Green River Station for the freight job? Something passed between the two men that Rebecca couldn't interpret. Isaac cleared his throat. Actually, Jackson's offered me work here at the hotel. Some repairs need doing, and with the railroad bringing more travelers through town, he could use an extra hand. I see, Rebecca said, uncertain why this news made her heart beat faster. So you'll be staying? For a while? Isaac confirmed, his eyes not leaving hers. If that's all right with you. Why wouldn't it be? She asked, her voice softer than she intended. Jackson stood abruptly, a knowing smile playing at his lips. I should check on the front desk. Martha will show you your duties when you've finished eating, Rebecca. Once they were alone, Isaac leaned forward, his expression serious. I want to make sure you're safe, Rebecca. I know we've only just met, but, she prompted when he hesitated. But I care what happens to you, he finished simply. I'd like to stay close, at least until we're sure your uncle won't cause trouble. Rebecca studied him, this man who had risked his own safety to rescue a stranger. There was nothing calculating in his gaze, no hidden agenda she could detect, just genuine concern and perhaps something more, something that mirrored the unfamiliar warmth spreading through her own chest. I'd like that, she admitted. I feel safer when you're near. The smile that transformed his face made her breath catch. Then it's settled, he said, reaching across the table to briefly touch her hand. I'll stay. The following weeks established a new rhythm to Rebecca's life. She rose early each morning to help Martha prepare breakfast for the hotel guests, then spent the day cleaning rooms, changing linens, and assisting with whatever else needed doing. The work was honest and satisfying, so different from the controlled existence she'd led on her family's ranch. Isaac, true to his word, remained at the hotel. He worked alongside Jackson, repairing the roof, building new furniture for the lobby, and helping to expand the dining room to accommodate the increasing number of travelers brought by the railroad. Rebecca often found reasons to pass by whatever area he was working in, and he seemed equally drawn to wherever she was performing her duties. They spoke often, At first about practical matters, her adjustment to the hotel, his progress on the repairs, but gradually their conversations deepened. He told her about his years on the cattle trails, the sights he'd seen across the territory, the dreams he'd nurtured of someday having a place of his own. She shared memories of her father, her love of books, her secret desire to see the ocean someday. Each revelation, each shared story, drew them closer, weaving an invisible bond that grew stronger with each passing day. Rebecca found herself watching for his smile, cataloging the different ways his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed, the way his voice softened when they spoke alone. A month after her arrival in Green River, Rebecca was arranging flowers in the dining room when Jackson approached, his expression unusually serious. "There are 2 men asking about you at the front desk," he said quietly. "They match the description you gave of your uncle and stepbrother." Rebecca's hands trembled, sending petals scattering across the tablecloth. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing yet," Jackson replied. "I said I needed to check the register. Isaac is bringing them into my office. I thought you should know they're here before we decide how to handle this." Rebecca's mind raced. She had known this confrontation might come, but the reality of it still sent fear coursing through her. "What do they want?" "They claim they're concerned about you, say you ran away after becoming unwell, that they've been searching for you out of worry." Jackson's tone made it clear he didn't believe a word of it. "That's not true," Rebecca said, her voice steadier than she expected. "They imprisoned me. They were going to force me to marry against my will." "I know," Jackson assured her, "and I won't let them take you anywhere you don't want to go. But you need to decide how you want to handle this. Do you want to face them? Or would you prefer to stay out of sight while Isaac and I deal with them?" Rebecca considered her options. The thought of seeing her uncle and Marcus again made her stomach clench with anxiety. But hiding would only postpone the inevitable, and it would mean continuing to live in fear. "I'll face them," she decided, squaring her shoulders. "But not alone." Jackson nodded approvingly. "Isaac won't leave your side. I can promise you that." They walked together to Jackson's office, a small room behind the reception desk. Through the partly open door, Rebecca could see Isaac standing with his back against the wall, arms crossed over his chest, watching her uncle and stepbrother with the wary focus of a man prepared for trouble. Her uncle, Howard Byrne, sat in one of the chairs facing Jackson's desk, his gray hair neatly combed, his clothing respectable every inch the concerned guardian. Marcus stood behind him, taller and broader than Rebecca remembered, or perhaps it was just the contrast with her memory of him looming over her in the cellar. Rebecca took a deep breath and pushed the door fully open. For heads turned in her direction, and she saw the shock register on her relatives' faces. "Rebecca," her uncle said, recovering quickly. "Thank God you're safe. We've been so worried." "Have you?" she replied, her voice cold. "That's not how I remember it, Uncle Howard." Marcus stepped forward, his expression hard. "You're coming home with us, Rebecca. Now." Isaac straightened from his position against the wall, his hand moving to rest casually near his holstered revolver. "The lady isn't going anywhere she doesn't choose to go." Howard's gaze flickered between Rebecca and Isaac, calculation evident in his pale eyes. "This is a family matter," he said smoothly. "Rebecca has been unwell. The doctor advised us." "Stop lying," Rebecca interrupted, anger finally overwhelming her fear. "You locked me in our cellar for 3 weeks because I wouldn't marry Harold Whitcomb. You kept me chained like an animal." "That's absurd," Howard scoffed, though a flush was creeping up his neck. "Marcus, tell them what really happened." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, less skilled at deception than his father. "She's confused," he muttered. The fever affected her mind. "Show them your wrists, Rebecca," Isaac suggested quietly. Rebecca pushed up the sleeves of her dress, revealing the healing but still visible marks where the iron cuffs had rubbed her skin raw. "Do these look like the result of a fever to you, Mr. Miller?" Jackson examined the scars, his expression darkening. "They look like restraint marks to me. I've seen similar on prisoners." Howard stood abruptly. "This is outrageous. Rebecca is my legal ward until she marries. I have the right to take her home." "Actually," Jackson said, moving to his desk and removing a document from a drawer, "you don't. I took the liberty of consulting with Judge Henshaw last week, given what Isaac told me about your treatment of your niece." He handed the paper to Howard. This is a restraining order preventing you from approaching or attempting to remove Rebecca from Green River. Howard snatched the document, his face contorting with rage as he scanned it. This is meaningless. No judge would. Judge Henshaw would and did. Jackson interrupted. He was quite disturbed by the account of Rebecca's imprisonment. In fact, he suggested that if you pursue this matter, he would be happy to consider criminal charges against you both. Marcus grabbed his father's arm. Pa, maybe we should. Howard shook him off. I won't be threatened in this manner. Rebecca belongs at the ranch. It's her duty to her family. My duty. Rebecca's voice rose. Was it your duty as my guardian to imprison me? To starve me? To try to sell me to a man 3 times my age to cover your gambling debts? The accusation hung in the air, and for a moment, no one spoke. Then Howard's expression changed, calculation replacing anger. The ranch is failing, Rebecca, he said, his tone suddenly reasonable. Without Whitcomb's offer, we'll lose everything your father built. Is that what you want? I want to be free to make my own choices, Rebecca replied firmly. If that means losing the ranch, then so be it. Howard's face hardened again. You ungrateful, that's enough, Isaac interrupted, stepping forward. Miss Byrne has made her position clear. I suggest you leave now, while you still can. Marcus tugged at his father's sleeve again. Pa, let's go. We can figure something else out. For a tense moment, Howard looked as if he might refuse. Then, with a curt nod, he folded the restraining order and tucked it into his coat pocket. This isn't over, he said, looking directly at Rebecca. That land is your birthright. You're abandoning your responsibility to our family. No, Uncle Howard, Rebecca replied steadily. I'm choosing not to be a victim anymore. There's a difference. Without another word, Howard turned and stalked from the office, Marcus following close behind. The tension in the room dissipated slightly, but Rebecca remained rigid, arms wrapped around herself as if for protection. Are you all right? Isaac asked softly, moving to her side. She nodded, though in truth, she felt shaken by the confrontation. Do you think they'll really leave? Just like that. They don't have much choice, Jackson said. The restraining order is real, and so is Judge Henshaw's interest in your case. Your uncle is many things, but he's not foolish enough to risk prison. Besides, Isaac added, his voice grim, they know we'll be watching for them now. They won't catch us off guard. Rebecca exhaled slowly, trying to release some of the tension gripping her body. Thank you both. I couldn't have faced them alone. You weren't alone, Isaac said simply. And you won't be. Something in his tone made her look up, meeting his gaze. The intensity she found there caused her heart to skip a beat. Jackson cleared his throat. I should check on the front desk, he said, a knowing smile playing at his lips as he excused himself from the office. Alone with Isaac, Rebecca found herself suddenly shy, uncertain what to say. The month they had spent working side by side at the hotel had created a bond between them, but neither had put words to the feelings that simmered beneath their daily interactions. I meant what I said, Isaac told her, his voice low. You won't have to face them or anything else alone, Rebecca. Not if you don't want to. She studied his face, the earnest blue eyes, the strong line of his jaw, the gentle curve of his mouth. This man had saved her life, had stood by her side through her recovery, had faced down her family without hesitation. And somewhere along the way, he had claimed a place in her heart that no one had ever occupied before. I don't want to, she admitted softly. Be alone, that is. Isaac took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Rebecca, he began, then hesitated, as if searching for the right words. I know we haven't known each other long, but I've never felt this way about anyone before. When I think about the future, all I can see is you. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. Isaac, you don't have to say anything, he rushed on. I know you're still healing, still finding your way. I can wait. I just wanted you to know that whenever you're ready, I'll be here. Rebecca reached out, placing her hand against his cheek. His skin was warm beneath her palm, the slight roughness of his day's growth of beard a pleasant sensation against her fingers. What if I'm ready now? She whispered. Isaac's eyes widened slightly, hope dawning in their blue depths. Are you sure? In answer, Rebecca rose onto her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, a question as much as an answer. Then Isaac's arms came around her, drawing her closer, and the kiss deepened into something more profound, a promise, a beginning. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the day I carried you out of that cellar," he confessed. Rebecca smiled, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with embarrassment. "I'm glad you finally did." As summer faded into autumn, Rebecca's life at the River Peak Hotel settled into a comfortable routine. Her duties as housekeeper kept her busy, but she found satisfaction in the work and in the independence it provided. The railroad brought a steady stream of travelers through Green River, and the hotel prospered, allowing Jackson to hire additional staff to help with the increased workload. Isaac continued his work on the hotel renovations, but he also took on carpentry jobs around town, his skill with woodworking earning him a reputation as one of the best craftsmen in the area. In the evenings, he and Rebecca would often sit on the hotel's wide front porch, talking about their day or simply enjoying each other's presence as the sun set over the distant mountains. Their relationship blossomed in these quiet moments, a touch of hands as they passed in the hallway, a private smile across the dining room, stolen kisses in the garden behind the hotel. Rebecca had never known that love could be like this, not a cage as her uncle had intended, but a door opening to possibility. On a crisp October evening, Isaac found her in the hotel kitchen, helping Martha prepare preserves from the last of the summer berries. "Could I steal you away for a bit?" he asked, a hint of nervousness in his usually confident demeanor. "There's something I'd like to show you." Martha shooed her away with a knowing smile. "Go on, dear. These jars can wait." Curious, Rebecca wiped her hands on her apron and followed Isaac outside. He led her to where his horse was saddled and waiting, a second mount, a gentle-looking bay mare tethered beside it. "Where are we going?" Rebecca asked as he helped her onto the mare. "Not far," he promised. "Just to the edge of town." They rode in companionable silence, following the river north out of Green River. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the land, gilding the autumn foliage with golden light. After about 15 minutes, Isaac guided them off the main trail toward a small rise overlooking the valley. At the top of the rise stood a partially constructed cabin, its log walls rising against the backdrop of pine trees, a stone chimney already completed at one end. Rebecca reined in her horse, staring at the structure in surprise. "What is this?" Isaac dismounted and came to help her down, his hands lingering at her waist. "It's not much yet," he said, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "But it will be, once it's finished." "You're building a house?" Rebecca asked, stepping closer to examine the sturdy pine logs, expertly notched and fitted together. "I am." Isaac took her hand, leading her around the structure. 2 bedrooms, a good-sized kitchen, a sitting room with bookshelves along this wall. He gestured as he spoke, painting the picture of the finished home. "The view of the valley is beautiful in every season, and there's good water from the spring behind those trees." Rebecca listened, enchanted by the vision he described. "It's wonderful, Isaac, but I don't understand." Isaac turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I told you once that I dreamed of having a place of my own someday." His blue eyes searched hers. "What I didn't say was that I can't imagine that place without you in it." Rebecca's heart began to race as understanding dawned. "Isaac." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a simple gold band. "I'm not a wealthy man, Rebecca. I can't offer you the kind of life you might have had if things had been different. But everything I have, everything I am, is yours if you want it." Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes as Isaac knelt before her, the ring held between them like a promise. "Rebecca Byrne, will you marry me? Will you make this house a home with me?" The tears spilled over, tracking silver paths down her cheeks. 6 months ago, she had been imprisoned, her future dictated by others, her worth measured only in what she could bring to a marriage not of her choosing. Now she stood free, loved for herself alone by a man who asked rather than demanded, who offered his heart as a gift rather than a transaction. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Isaac. I will marry you." Joy transformed his face as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the simple band gleaming in the late afternoon light. Isaac rose to his feet and drew her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the emotion words couldn't express. When they finally parted, Rebecca rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "When will the cabin be finished?" she asked. "By spring, if the weather holds," Isaac replied, his arms tightening around her. "Jackson's letting me use some of the lumber left over from the hotel renovations, and I've been working on it whenever I can spare the time." Rebecca looked up at him, overwhelmed by the depth of feeling his gesture represented. "All this time, you've been building us a home." Isaac smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I hoped it would be ours, yes. Though I was prepared to wait as long as necessary for you to be ready." "I am ready," Rebecca assured him. "More than ready to start our life together." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across what would soon be their home, Rebecca and Isaac walked hand in hand around the clearing, planning where they would plant a garden in the spring, where they might add on rooms as their family grew, how they would furnish each space to make it truly theirs. The wedding took place on a bright November morning in the Green River Church, with Jackson standing as Isaac's best man and Martha as Rebecca's matron of honor. The hotel staff and many of the townspeople attended, filling the small chapel with warmth and goodwill. Rebecca wore a dress of ivory silk that Martha had helped her make, with lace at the collar and cuffs that the older woman had saved from her own wedding gown. As she walked down the aisle toward Isaac, who waited for her with wonder in his eyes, Rebecca felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was what she had refused to surrender when her uncle tried to sell her to Harold Whitcomb, not just her freedom, but her chance at true love, at a life shared with someone who valued her for herself. The minister's words washed over her as she and Isaac joined hands, promising to love and cherish one another for all their days. When Isaac slipped the gold wedding band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were steady, his eyes never leaving hers. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Isaac cupped her face gently in his hands and kissed her with such tenderness that tears pricked at Rebecca's eyes. The church erupted in applause as they turned to face their friends, now united as husband and wife. The celebration continued at the hotel, where Jackson had arranged for a feast to be served in the dining room. There was music and dancing, laughter and congratulations, the community embracing the couple who had found each other against all odds. As evening fell, Isaac led Rebecca away from the festivities to the small suite of rooms Jackson had insisted they take as a wedding gift for their first night as husband and wife. Rose petals were scattered across the bed, and a bottle of champagne waited in a bucket of ice. Jackson's doing, no doubt. Alone for the first time as husband and wife, they stood in the center of the room, suddenly shy with each other despite the months of growing closeness. "Mrs. Devereux," Isaac said softly, the name still new and wonderful on his tongue. Rebecca smiled, stepping into his embrace. "I like the sound of that." Isaac's arms came around her, strong and secure. "So do I." Their kiss deepened, months of restrained desire finally finding expression. Isaac's hands traced the curve of her spine, while Rebecca's fingers tangled in his dark hair, drawing him closer. "I love you, Rebecca," Isaac murmured against her lips. "I think I've loved you since the moment I found you in that cellar, so brave despite everything you'd endured." Rebecca drew back slightly to look into his eyes. "And I love you, Isaac Devereux. You didn't just break my chains, you showed me what freedom really means." The winter passed in a blur of happiness for Rebecca and Isaac. They continued to live and work at the hotel while Isaac completed their cabin, using every spare moment to add the finishing touches that would make it a home. Rebecca often joined him, learning to plane wood smooth for shelves or to mix plaster for the interior walls, taking pride in contributing to the creation of their future home. News arrived from Bitter Creek shortly after Christmas. Harold Whitcomb had foreclosed on the Byrne ranch, taking possession of the land that had been in Rebecca's family for 3 generations. Her uncle and stepbrother had left the territory, rumors suggesting they had headed for California to try their luck in the gold fields that still drew desperate men west. Rebecca had expected to feel grief at the loss of her family home, but instead found only relief. The ranch represented a past she had escaped, while the cabin on the hill embodied the future she had chosen. Spring came early that year, the snow melting from the valleys by late February, wildflowers carpeting the hillsides in March. On the first truly warm day of April, Isaac and Rebecca moved into their completed cabin. It was everything Isaac had promised, simple but beautiful, with large windows to catch the light, sturdy walls to keep out the cold, and the bookshelves he had built specially for Rebecca's growing collection. They spent their first evening in their new home sitting on the front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, their fingers intertwined, their hearts full. "Are you happy?" Isaac asked, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. Rebecca leaned her head against his shoulder. "Happier than I ever thought possible." As spring turned to summer, their happiness only grew. Rebecca planted the garden they had planned, filling it with vegetables and herbs, while Isaac built a small stable for their horses and began clearing land for the orchard they hoped to establish. In late June, Rebecca discovered she was expecting their first child, due to arrive with the winter snows. Isaac's joy at the news was boundless. He lifted her in his arms and spun her around their kitchen, laughing and crying all at once. "A baby," he said in wonder, placing his hand gently over her still flat stomach. "Our baby." Rebecca covered his hand with hers. "The beginning of our family." The months that followed were filled with preparations, Isaac adding a cradle to his list of carpentry projects, Rebecca sewing tiny garments with Martha's guidance, both of them discussing names late into the night as they lay in their bed, dreaming of the future. On a snowy December evening, with a blizzard howling outside their snug cabin, Rebecca gave birth to a daughter, a tiny perfect being with Isaac's blue eyes and a dusting of Rebecca's auburn hair. "She's beautiful," Isaac whispered, cradling his daughter with hands that seemed suddenly too large and rough for such a delicate task. Just like her mother. Rebecca, exhausted but radiant, smiled up at them from the bed. "What shall we call her?" They had discussed many names over the months, but now, looking at their daughter's face, Isaac knew with certainty. "Hope," he said softly, "because that's what she is, the hope of our future, born from the love we found against all odds." "Hope," Rebecca repeated, tasting the name. "It's perfect." As the years passed, their family grew. Hope was joined by a brother, Daniel, 2 years later, and eventually by another sister, Emma. The cabin expanded as well, with Isaac adding rooms as their needs changed, the original structure becoming the heart of a home filled with laughter and love. Rebecca never again saw her uncle or stepbrother, though occasionally news reached Green River of their whereabouts, always moving, always searching for the fortune that seemed perpetually just beyond their grasp. She felt only pity for them now, understanding that in their greed, they had lost the only treasure that truly mattered: family. On the 10th anniversary of the day Isaac had found her in the cellar, Rebecca stood on their porch, watching as he taught Hope to ride her new pony in the meadow before their home. Daniel and Emma chased butterflies nearby, their childish laughter carrying on the summer breeze. The woman who had been locked away in darkness had found not just freedom but joy beyond measure, a husband who cherished her, children who adored her, a community that respected her, and a home built with love. The chains that had once bound her wrists had been transformed into the invisible, unbreakable bonds of family. As if sensing her thoughts, Isaac looked up from the meadow and caught her eye, his smile as warm and true as it had been on the day he'd carried her from her prison into the sunlight. Rebecca smiled back, her heart overflowing with gratitude for the cowboy who had broken her chains and, in doing so, had given her the greatest gift of all, a life lived in love.